In 2019, a young couple in Dublin saved for 3 years to afford a down payment on a small apartment. They needed €35,000. By 2023, that same apartment required a €75,000 down payment, more than double. Their savings became worthless. They gave up and moved to Canada. This isn't a story about one couple. This is happening to millions of young Europeans right now. And it's about to get much, much worse. Europe's housing crash isn't some future prediction. It's happening right now, today, in real time. And the devastation is far beyond anything you've been told. We're going to show you exactly how bad this is. Real numbers, real cities, real people being destroyed by the worst housing crisis in European history. For 15 years, we were told European property was a safe investment. Prices only go up. Buy now or regret forever. Rent is throwing money away. Real estate never crashes in Europe. Every single one of those statements was a lie, and millions of people believed it. They borrowed enormous amounts of money. They bet their entire financial future on property, and now they're about to lose everything. What you're about to see is the anatomy of 4 housing markets in total collapse. Dublin, Amsterdam, Stockholm, and Berlin. 4 completely different cities, 4 different economies, but all facing the same catastrophic crash. Why these 4 cities? Because they represent the epicenter of Europe's housing bubble. They rose the fastest. They became the most unaffordable, and now they're falling the hardest. But this isn't just about these 4 cities. What happens here will spread across Europe. Brussels, Copenhagen, Vienna, Hamburg, Edinburgh. Dozens of cities face the same fate. These 4 are just the first to collapse. Let's start with the numbers that nobody wants you to see. Dublin. Average property price in 2015, €235,000. Average property price in 2023, €420,000. That's a 79% increase in 8 years. Average salary in Dublin increased by 18% in the same period. Let that sink in. Property prices rose 79%. Salaries rose 18%. How is that sustainable? It's not. It never was. Amsterdam. Average property price in 2015, €285,000. Average property price in 2023, €565,000. That's a 98% increase, nearly doubled. Average salary increased by 22%. Stockholm. Average property price in 2015, 3.2 million kroner. Average property price in 2023, 6.8 million kroner. That's a 112% increase, more than doubled. Average salary increased by 15%. Berlin. This is the most shocking. Average property price in 2015, €175,000. Average property price in 2023, €385,000. That's a 120% increase. Salary growth, 19%. These aren't normal market corrections. These are speculative bubbles inflated by cheap credit, foreign investment, and complete regulatory failure. And now, physics is taking over. What goes up must come down. The crash is already here. Sales volumes are collapsing. In Dublin, property transactions dropped 31% in 2024. In Amsterdam, down 33%. In Stockholm, down 42%. In Berlin, down 44%. Those aren't small declines. Those are market freezes. When sales drop 40%, that's not a slowdown. That's a market that stopped functioning. Prices are starting to follow. Dublin prices down 6% from peak. Amsterdam flat to slightly down. Stockholm down 18%. Berlin down 11%. But here's what the media isn't telling you. These are just the beginning. The initial tremors before the earthquake. Property markets don't crash overnight. They collapse in slow motion over years. Experts are now predicting Dublin prices will fall 25% to 35% from peak. Amsterdam 30% to 40%. Stockholm 35% to 45%. Berlin 25% to 35%. Translate that into real numbers. A Dublin apartment bought for €420,000 in 2023 will be worth $273,000 to €315,000. That's a loss of €105,000 to €147,000. More than most Irish workers earn in 2 years. Gone. An Amsterdam apartment bought for €565,000 will be worth €339,000 to €395,000. A loss of €170,000 to €226,000. An entire life savings evaporated. A Stockholm apartment bought for 6.8 million krona will be worth 3.7 to 4.4 million krona. A loss of 2.4 to 3.1 million krona. Families financially destroyed. A Berlin apartment bought for 385,000 euros will be worth 250,000 to 289,000 euros. A loss of 96,000 to 135,000 euros. Negative equity for hundreds of thousands of households. These aren't abstract numbers. These are real families who saved for decades, borrowed heavily, and bought at the top of the market. They're about to lose everything. And here's the cruelest part. They can't sell. If you bought a Dublin apartment for 420,000 and it's now worth 320,000, you still owe the bank 380,000 on your mortgage. If you sell, you owe the bank 60,000 euros with no house. You're trapped. This is called negative equity, and it's about to trap millions of European families in financial prison for decades. How did this happen? How did 4 wealthy, stable European cities create housing bubbles that would make even American subprime lenders blush? The story is different in each city, but the pattern is the same. Low interest rates, foreign investment, regulatory failure, greed, and ordinary families caught in the middle. Let's start with Dublin. Ireland learned nothing from its 2008 crash. Absolutely nothing. Irish property crashed 55% between 2007 and 2012. Families lost everything. The government had to be bailed out by the EU. It was a national catastrophe. By 2015, Ireland had supposedly reformed. New regulations. Careful lending. Never again. Then the tech companies arrived. Google, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon. They all built major European headquarters in Dublin. Why? Low corporate taxes, English-speaking, EU access. These companies brought 50,000 high-paid workers to a city of 1.4 million. Tech workers earning 80,000 to 150,000 euros, competing for housing against Irish workers earning 35,000 euros. The result was predictable. Property prices exploded. Tech workers could afford anything. They bid up prices across the city, then into suburbs, then into surrounding towns. Irish families were priced out of their own capital. A teacher and a nurse, solid middle-class jobs, couldn't afford a 2-bedroom apartment within an hour of Dublin city centre. Developers couldn't build fast enough. Ireland has strict planning regulations, green belt protections, heritage rules. Getting approval for new housing takes years. Supply couldn't keep up with demand, so prices went vertical. 2016 plus 7%, 2017 plus 12%, 2018 plus 13%, 2019 plus 8%. Even COVID barely slowed it. 2021 plus 10%, 2022 plus 9%. Everyone assumed it would last forever. Tech companies would keep growing. Dublin would become the Silicon Valley of Europe. Buy now or be priced out permanently. Then 2023 hit. Interest rates rose from 0% to 4.5%. Tech companies started mass layoffs. Google cut 12,000 jobs globally. Meta cut 11,000. Amazon cut 18,000. Microsoft cut 10,000. Dublin's growth engine sputtered. The flow of high-paid workers stopped. Some moved back to America. Others were laid off. The demand that drove prices up disappeared. Acquiesta, Obat sellers, still wanted 2023 prices. They remembered what their neighbors sold for 6 months ago. They refused to accept reality. So properties sat on the market. 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. No offers. Finally, in late 2024, sellers started cutting prices. First 5%, then 10%. Now 15% below asking price and still not selling. The market is in free fall. Banks are getting nervous. They lent billions against inflated property values. If prices fall 30%, many of those loans are underwater. Irish banks survived 2008 by EU bailout. Will the EU bail them out again? Probably not. Europe has its own problems now. So Dublin faces a slow-motion catastrophe. Prices falling, sales frozen, banks exposed, and 200,000 young Irish people who left the country because they couldn't afford housing. They're not coming back. Now, let's look at Amsterdam. Amsterdam's crisis is different. This wasn't driven by tech companies. This was driven by global wealth using Amsterdam as a luxury asset. Amsterdam is beautiful. Canals, historic architecture, liberal culture, perfect location in Europe. Wealthy people worldwide wanted a piece of it. Chinese investors bought apartments as safe haven assets. Russian oligarchs before sanctions. American and British investors. Middle Eastern wealth. They saw Amsterdam property as better than gold, stable, appreciating. In the heart of Europe. Then came Airbnb. Amsterdam became one of Europe's top tourist destinations. Property owners realized they could earn triple the income from tourists versus long-term renters. By 2022, Amsterdam had over 20,000 Airbnb listings in a city of 850,000 people. Entire neighborhoods converted to tourist accommodation. Locals couldn't find anywhere to live. The city center became a theme park. Tourists everywhere. No real residents. Schools closing. Local shops replaced by tourist shops. The soul of Amsterdam was being destroyed. Average rent reached 2,100 euros for a two-bedroom apartment. On an average Amsterdam salary of 38,000 euros, you take home maybe 2,500 euros monthly. After rent, you have 400 euros for everything else. Impossible. Young Dutch people gave up on Amsterdam entirely. They moved to Utrecht, Rotterdam, The Hague. They commuted 2 hours each way. They lived in shared housing until their mid-30s. The Amsterdam dream was over. The city government finally acted in 2023. They banned most Airbnb activity, limited short-term rentals to 30 days per year, massively increased fines, started serious enforcement. Investors panicked. They bought properties expecting tourist income. Now that income is illegal. They can rent long-term for much less or sell at a loss. Most are trying to sell, but there are no buyers. Who wants to pay 565,000 euros for an apartment when the rental model is illegal and prices are falling? Foreign investors are trapped. The market froze in 2024, sales down 33%. Prices flat because sellers refuse to cut, but nothing sells. It's a standoff. Eventually, sellers will capitulate. When they do, prices will crash 30% to 40% in a matter of months. Dutch banks are heavily exposed. They lent against inflated values. They approved mortgages, assuming prices would keep rising. Now, those assumptions are collapsing. And here's Amsterdam's unique problem. Dutch mortgages are often interest only. You pay only interest for years, never reducing the principal. When property values fall, you owe more than the house is worth with no equity built up. It's a debt trap. Hundreds of thousands of Dutch families are in interest-only mortgages on overpriced properties. When the crash accelerates, they'll be destroyed. Amsterdam is also facing a political reckoning. The Dutch government promoted foreign investment and tourism for years. They encouraged the property boom. Now voters are furious. Far-right parties won the last election partially on housing anger. Young Dutch voters are radicalized by being priced out of cities. They want radical solutions. Expel foreign owners. Seize empty properties. Punish investors. The political stability of the Netherlands is threatened by housing. That's how serious this is. Now Stockholm. This is where the European housing crisis becomes truly terrifying. Sweden has the highest household debt in Europe, 180% of disposable income. Swedish families borrowed enormous amounts to buy overpriced housing. Why? Because Sweden had negative interest rates for years. You could borrow essentially for free. Banks were desperate to lend. Families borrowed the maximum possible amount. Everyone bought. Everyone upgraded. Everyone borrowed more. Property prices in Stockholm doubled in 10 years. A million-person city with prices comparable to London or Paris. But here's Sweden's catastrophic mistake. Most Swedish mortgages are variable rate. When interest rates change, your mortgage payment changes immediately. There's no fixed rate protection like in America or the UK. So when the Swedish central bank raised rates from negative 0.5% to positive 4%, every single mortgage payment in Sweden exploded. Families saw their monthly payment increase 60% to 80% in 18 months. Imagine your €2,000 mortgage becoming €3,400 overnight. Most families can't absorb that. They can't afford it. They have three choices: default, sell, or destroy their quality of life to pay. Many are defaulting. Swedish banks reported default rates tripled in 2024. Forced sales are increasing. Properties are being seized and auctioned. Others are selling voluntarily before they default. But everyone is trying to sell simultaneously. No buyers. Prices are crashing. Stockholm prices fell 18% in 2024 and are still falling. The Swedish central bank issued a warning in 2024. They estimated 15% of Swedish households face severe financial distress. That's 1.5 million people at immediate risk of losing their homes. This isn't a housing crisis. This is a national financial emergency. And it's accelerating. Swedish banks are in trouble. They lent heavily against property values that are now falling rapidly. They're facing massive losses. Some analysts worry about bank failures. If a major Swedish bank fails, it could trigger a European banking crisis. Because European banks are interconnected, a Swedish bank failure spreads contagion to Denmark, Norway, Finland, then across Europe. This is 2008 level systemic risk, and nobody is talking about it loudly enough. Stockholm's crash is also destroying the Swedish social model. Sweden prided itself on equality and social stability. Now, young Swedes can't afford housing, while older generations sit on massive property wealth. Generational wealth inequality is exploding. Older Swedes who bought property in the 1990s have 2 million kronor in equity. Young Swedes born in 1995 have zero chance of ever owning property. The society is fracturing. Swedish politics is shifting right. Far-right parties are in government for the first time. Immigration is being restricted. The welfare state is being cut. Housing anger is transforming Sweden. And finally, Berlin, the city where the housing crash is most ideologically charged and politically explosive. Berlin was supposed to be different, the affordable European capital, the city where artists, musicians, and creative people could actually live and work, the alternative to expensive London and Paris. In 2010, you could rent a large apartment in central Berlin for €400. You could buy a beautiful apartment for €100,000. Berlin was cheap, cool, and full of possibility. Then the world discovered Berlin. Tech startups, international workers, digital nomads, wealthy Germans from Munich and Frankfurt buying second homes, foreign investors. Everyone wanted a piece of Berlin. Property prices more than doubled between 2015 and 2023, from €2,500 per square meter to €5,800. Rent doubled, then tripled in some neighborhoods. The Berlin that creative people loved was being destroyed by its own success. Artists couldn't afford studios, musicians forced to suburbs. The alternative culture that made Berlin special was being priced out. Berliners fought back harder than any other European city. Massive protests, squatting movements. In 2021, they held a referendum to expropriate corporate landlords. 56% voted yes, seize properties from companies that own more than 3,000 apartments. The referendum was symbolic, not legally binding, but it showed the rage. Berliners wanted revolutionary action against the housing crisis. The Berlin government tried rent control in 2020. They froze all rents and capped them at 2019 levels. It was the most aggressive rent control policy in Europe. It failed catastrophically. The Constitutional Court struck it down in 2021, but the damage was done. Investors fled Berlin. Developers stopped building. The policy made the crisis worse. Now Berlin faces a perfect storm. Prices are too high. Construction stopped. Investors are scared of political risk, and Germany's economy is crashing. Sales in Berlin dropped 44% in 2024. 44%. That's the largest decline in any major European city. The market is in total collapse. Prices are down 11% from peak and falling accelerating. Every month brings bigger declines. Experts predict Berlin will fall 25% to 35% from peak, maybe more if Germany's recession deepens. But here's Berlin's unique tragedy. Even when prices crash, housing won't become affordable because the people who could afford to buy are leaving Berlin. Germany's economy is imploding, industrial jobs disappearing, startups failing, tech layoffs constant. The young professionals who could afford €400,000 apartments are moving abroad or to other German cities. Berlin is being hollowed out economically while simultaneously being unaffordable. It's the worst of both worlds, and Berlin's crash will take the rest of Germany with it. Because Berlin was the success story, the city that attracted global talent. If Berlin fails, what hope does Cologne or Stuttgart or Hamburg have? German banks are massively exposed to Berlin real estate. They lent billions assuming perpetual growth. Those assumptions are collapsing in real time. So we have 4 cities, 4 different stories, but the same ending: catastrophic housing crashes that will destroy millions of families financially. Let's talk about what this means for actual people. Not statistics, not market analysis, real human beings. Meet Sophia. She's 32, works as a software engineer in Dublin, earns €65,000. Good salary, right? She saved for 5 years and bought a small apartment in 2022 for €380,000. Today, that apartment is worth €330,000. She owes €335,000 on her mortgage. She's underwater by €45,000 when you include selling costs. She can't sell. She can't move for a better job. She's trapped. And prices are still falling. By 2026, she'll likely be €80,000 underwater. That's more than a year of her gross salary. Gone. She'll be paying that mortgage for 30 years on a property worth far less than she borrowed. Financial slavery. Meet Lars and Emma. They're 29 and 31, live in Stockholm, household income €85,000. They bought an apartment in 2021 for 5.2 million kroner. They borrowed 4.8 million at near zero interest. Their monthly mortgage payment was 14,000 kroner. Manageable. Then interest rates rose. Their payment is now 24,000 kroner. They take home 52,000 kroner monthly as a household. After mortgage, they have 28,000 for everything else. They're struggling. They stopped eating out. They canceled vacations. They're not having children. Their apartment is now worth 4.1 million kroner. They owe 4.7 million. They're trapped and drowning. Meet Nina. She's 27, works as a graphic designer in Berlin, earns €38,000. She rents a small 1-bedroom apartment for €1,400 monthly. She takes home €2,100. After rent, she has €700 for everything she wanted to buy. She saved €25,000 over 5 years. In 2019, that was enough for a down payment. Today, it's not even close. Banks want €60,000 to €80,000 down payment in Berlin. She'll never own property. Ever. She's resigned to renting forever, watching her rent increase every year while her salary stays flat. She's considering leaving Berlin, maybe leaving Germany entirely. Meet Tom and Sarah. They're both 35, teachers in Amsterdam, combined income €72,000. They've been trying to buy for 4 years. Every time they saved enough for a down payment, prices rose faster. They finally gave up in 2024. They're moving to a smaller city an hour away. 2-hour commute to their teaching jobs. Less time with their daughter. Lower quality of life. But it's the only way they can ever afford a home. These are real stories. Multiply them by millions. That's the human cost of Europe's housing crash. And here's what makes this worse than America's 2008 crisis. In America, you could walk away from an underwater mortgage in many states. The bank takes the house, you're free of the debt. In Europe, you can't. The debt follows you forever. If you default, the bank seizes your house and you still owe the difference. If your house sells for 300,000 and you owe 380,000, you owe the bank 80,000 with no house, plus fees, plus interest on that debt. Bankruptcy doesn't clear it in most European countries. You're trapped in that debt for decades. It will follow you, damage your credit, prevent you from borrowing for anything else. European families who bought at the peak will be financially destroyed for life. There's no escape, no reset button. Just decades of paying for a mistake they couldn't have predicted. And who could have predicted it? Everyone told them to buy. Financial advisors, banks, real estate agents, government officials, media, parents, friends. The entire society said property prices only go up in Europe. They were lied to, and now they'll pay for those lies for the rest of their lives. But let's talk about the group suffering most, young Europeans, the generation that will never own homes. If you're under 35 in Dublin, Amsterdam, Stockholm, or Berlin, your chance of owning property is essentially zero. Even after the crash, you won't be able to buy. Why? Because when markets crash, banks stop lending. They require massive down payments, 40% instead of 10%, perfect credit scores, guaranteed employment, multiple income sources. After 2008, American banks tightened lending so much that millions of people with good jobs couldn't qualify for mortgages. Europe will do the same. So property prices will fall 30%, but young people still won't be able to buy. The crashed properties will be scooped up by investment funds with cash, BlackRock, Blackstone, and similar mega funds. These funds are already positioning. They're raising billions specifically to buy European property after the crash. They'll acquire thousands of apartments at distressed prices, hold them for 20 years, and rent them back to the same young people who couldn't afford to buy. It's the greatest wealth transfer in European history, from middle-class families to global investment funds, from ordinary people to financial elites. Young Europeans will become permanent renters in their own cities, owned by faceless international corporations, paying rent that increases faster than their salaries, never building equity, never achieving financial security. This is neo-feudalism, a small ownership class and a massive renter class with no path to property ownership. Medieval economics in 21st century Europe, and the political consequences will be catastrophic. Young people who can't afford housing radicalize. They stop believing in the system. They vote for extremists. They protest. They riot. We're already seeing it. France's Yellow Vest protests were partly about fuel taxes, but fundamentally about cost of living and housing. Netherlands elected far-right partly on housing anger. Germany's far-right surges as housing becomes unaffordable. Sweden's politics shifting right as young people are crushed. Housing is destroying European political stability. When an entire generation is locked out of home ownership, they lose faith in democracy and capitalism. They'll try anything different, even dangerous alternatives. The far right knows this. They're exploiting housing anger brilliantly. They blame immigrants for housing shortages. They promise to seize property from foreigners. They offer simple, appealing, wrong solutions. And voters are listening because the mainstream parties have no answers. The center-left says, build more social housing. But that takes decades. The center-right says, free market solutions. But the market created this disaster. Nobody has solutions that work fast enough to prevent political collapse. So Europe spirals toward extremism, driven partly by housing. Now let's talk about what happens next. The timeline of collapse. 2025, prices continue falling. Dublin down 15% from peak. Amsterdam down 12%. Stockholm down 25%. Berlin down 18%. Sales volumes collapse further. More defaults. Banks start reporting major losses. First bank warnings appear. Maybe a small bank fails. Governments reassure everyone it's contained. It's not. 2026. The crash accelerates. Dublin down 25%. Amsterdam down 30%. Stockholm down 35%. Berlin down 28%. Mass defaults begin. Forced sales flood the market. Prices fall faster as desperation selling increases. A major European bank fails, probably Swedish or Dutch. Government has to intervene. Bailout or controlled collapse. Either way, confidence crashes. Credit freezes across Europe. 2027, the bottom approaches. Dublin down 30%. Amsterdam down 38%. Stockholm down 42%. Berlin down 32%. Markets are destroyed. Millions underwater. Banks bleeding. Economies in recession. Investment funds start buying aggressively. They acquire thousands of properties at 40% to 50% discounts from peak. The consolidation begins. 2028, 2030. The stabilization. Prices stop falling but don't recover. They stay depressed for years. Young people still can't buy because banks won't lend. The permanent renter class solidifies. Cities change character. Less vibrant, older, less innovation. Brain drain to other countries continues. The dynamism that made these cities special is gone. This isn't speculation. This is how housing crashes work. We've seen it before in Japan, Spain, Ireland, America. The pattern is always the same. Bubble, crash, long depression, slow stabilization at much lower levels. But Europe's crash will be worse because Europe has less flexibility. American cities can sprawl. American workers can relocate easily. American economy can absorb shocks better. European cities are constrained by geography and regulations. European workers are locked by language and culture. European economies are rigid and heavily indebted. So the crash will be deeper and the recovery slower. Maybe a decade of depressed prices. Maybe 15 years before stability returns. An entire generation will lose their prime, earning and wealth-building years to this crisis. They'll emerge at 45 years old with no assets, no property, no security. Too late to catch up. Can anything prevent this? Governments are trying. Emergency housing construction, rent controls, foreign ownership bans, first-time buyer subsidies. But it's all too little, too late. You can't fix a decade of policy failure with a few emergency measures. The bubble already formed. The crash already started. Gravity can't be stopped. The only question is how bad it gets and how long it lasts. Best case, prices fall 25% and stabilize after 3 years. Painful, but survivable. Worst case, prices fall 45%. Banking crisis, economic depression, decade-long stagnation, lost generation, political extremism, social breakdown. Which scenario plays out depends on European Central Bank policy, government responses, and how bad the secondary effects become. But either way, millions of European families will be destroyed financially. An entire generation will be locked out of home ownership. Cities will be transformed. The European middle class will shrink dramatically. This is the biggest economic catastrophe in Europe since World War II. And it's happening right now while most people aren't paying attention. American media focuses on US issues. Asian media focuses on China. European media downplays the severity to avoid panic. So nobody's telling the full truth. That's why this channel exists. To show you the real data. To track the crash as it unfolds. To explain what it means for real people in real cities. Every week, we'll update you on Dublin, Amsterdam, Stockholm, and Berlin. Show you the latest price data, the sales numbers, the default rates, the bank losses, the human stories. We'll interview families losing their homes, young people giving up on ever owning property, experts explaining the mechanisms, politicians failing to respond adequately. This is the most important economic story in Europe right now. It will reshape society for decades. It will determine political futures. It will destroy millions of families financially, and you need to understand it. Whether you're trying to buy, trying to sell, trying to protect your wealth, or just trying to understand what's happening to Europe, the European housing crash is far worse than anyone realizes, worse than media reports, worse than government admits, worse than most people can imagine. But now you know the truth. You've seen the data, you understand the mechanisms, you know what's coming. Subscribe to track Europe's housing crash in real time, because this story is just beginning. The crash will deepen, the consequences will spread, and we'll document every step. Dublin, Amsterdam, Stockholm, Berlin, 4 cities in freefall, millions of families being destroyed, the collapse of the European dream of home ownership. This is happening now. This is real, and it's far worse than anyone realizes.